Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LEC versus week number 1 overview and analysis video. We've got a ton to cover in today's video. Of course, we've already talked a bit about the LEC here on this channel because we did my primer and power rankings video last week. We talked about every single team, all 12 of them, my expectations. I ranked every team. I ranked every player within their positions, and I highly recommend you go and check that video out if you have not already seen it going into this one. But today, we're going to get to cover every single thing that happened in week number 1, all 18 best of ones. It's a ridiculous format, 6 best of ones per day. Obviously, I'll kind of get into it a little bit here. I talked about it in the primer. I love the fact that obviously we have 2 kind of guest spot teams, if you will, 2 provisional teams in Los Ratones and Corp Blue in the LEC, because I think it's always fun to get some crossover between Tier 1 and Tier 2. However, this format's kind of bad, right? Like, let's be entirely honest. We've got a lot to cover in a video like this where we separate everything by series, and 18 best of ones are certainly a choice in 3 separate days. But I'm excited to get into it at the very least to see how these teams end up playing. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions on everything that ended up breaking down in week number 1. Quick, I guess, announcement or plug at the beginning of this video. I'm still casting for LPL English. You can check out the links to that in the description. The YouTube and the Twitch are available there. I will be on this weekend for one of the series, and I'll be on for the rest of the split for LPL English. A podcast episode with me, Alk, and Grapes just came out today or yesterday, one of the days as you are seeing this video, so definitely go ahead and check that out as well. I'll make a post about it on the channel where you can find the link, but that was just a small plug. If you are interested in maybe hearing me cast live or, just generally getting some good LPL content, that's definitely the place to head. So check the links in the description. But without further ado, let's jump into the content itself for the LEC, because like I said, we've got a ton to talk about. Typically, I go pretty in-depth, spend about 6 to 10 minutes on each series when I, or each game when I kind of talk about these teams. It's going to be much less than that for the games here today, and I promise I will do my best to stick to that number. I know I can yap on this channel that I definitely take a little bit longer than I always say that I'm going to, but with so many games and so many sides to get through, I want to make sure that we don't have a 4-hour long video on our hands. So hopefully I get to stick to my word, and that means kicking it off with day number 1. As a reminder of the format, it's best of ones all the way through to the regular season. Every single team plays once per day, 3 times per week, so we'll go day by day. And starting with day number 1, kicking off our LEC year in 2026, was one of our provisional teams getting their first taste in the LEC. It was Los Ratones taking on Fnatic. And Fnatic is going to pick up the victory here. No surprise, no upset. I said this in my primer video, but I expect the 2 teams that are not in the LEC, both Corp Blue and Los Ratones, to be the 2 worst teams in the LEC this split. I just don't really think they have a lot of standing to be considered better than any of the other LEC teams, and I think this was a really good example as to why I have that opinion. There were a couple of players on LR that I just was not super confident about heading into this. I think Baus generally was better than maybe his KDA would indicate, and I would say generally this game was closer than maybe the scoreline would show, like 2-13, 32 minutes. Like, this was a game where I think LR had some chances to be able to play it out, but Fnatic's execution and just generally their composure was so much better that it really was not difficult for them to be able to cross the finish line a little bit more consistently. We'll talk about the big mistakes, the 2 massive mistakes that I think Los Ratones made throughout this game. But for Fnatic, player of the game, kind of up for debate. Like, again, in best of ones, it's really hard to just sit there and go, like, you were definitely better than everybody else on the Rift, and you were the best player, unless there's, like, one really designated carry. Broadcast ended up giving it to Imperos, the rookie on the top side. Totally understand that. I think he was very influential, especially in some of the major team fights towards major objectives, we'll just say, down the stretch of the game. But I'm giving it to Upset. It really did feel like there was a pretty big AD carry gap in terms of consistency and stability. Upset going 7-0-4 on a champion like Unara, where he can just play front to back and play around a lot of the engage coming through on Fnatic, was much better than Crowny. We'll just say on the other side, he was making quite a few positioning mistakes on the Corki himself. But Upset is just one of those players that generally is going to look great if the circumstance allows him to just be an AD carry, right? Like, where Upset really struggles is having to, like, full 1v9 type games. Like, he just doesn't have that kind of mentality. He kind of fits into the Teddy mold as I kind of talk about it. I just think he's very mechanically talented, probably more mechanically talented than someone like Teddy over in the LCK, and so he can like pop off in games a little bit more consistently, especially if he does have resources. And if the rest of the team around him is setting him up well, and if Fnatic is drafting well, which they did in this game, then I think you're in a pretty good spot. I've talked about this a lot. I actually said this on the LPL broadcast when we were covering one of the series last weekend, but Vi and Taliyah as a mid lane or a mid-game duo to carry you into a hyper carry ADC, I think is something that we are going to see super commonly right now, because it's really important that you have a lot of tempo out of the middle of the map. And Vi Taliyah are probably the best tempo lane in the entire game, or tempo duo for mid jungle in the entire game, and Yunara probably the most consistent late game hyper carry right now in the entire game. So do not be surprised if you see this trio a lot more, not only in the LEC but basically globally throughout 2026. I think it's incredibly strong right now, and Upset kind of showed that off. But again, big credit to Imperos. He was better in lane than Baus. Not that that should surprise anybody. Baus is not exactly known for his dominant laning, and then, you know, he was really important in, I think, some of the late game team fights. If you wanted to give Imperos player of the game, I totally understand. Lospa, I think, is also pretty solid here. I think he looked very good in his first series in the LEC. He's a player that I had higher expectations for, especially with how good supports are right now in Europe, and I think he can slot in near the top basically immediately, and I think he played well. Vladi goes deathless. Razork goes deathless on the Vi as well. Fnatic just looking solid. Los Ratones on the other side, two major mistakes, or I guess two players that were making some major mistakes. Both Velia and Crownie, I think, were really off their game here today. Neither of them looking even remotely passable. Quite frankly, Crownie made the same kind of major mistakes he was making towards the end of last year in EMEA Masters when this team really needed him to step up. He's constantly getting caught in the mid game, the ruler spot, if you will. He's getting caught out there and just dying for no reason, giving over tempo and not really allowing his team to be in games. That's why, for me, he's going to get dud of the game. I think it's up to you to kind of determine whether you think Velia was better or worse than Crownie in this one. I think Velia had more chances to be bad, and he was bad more often, but I think Crownie really didn't do anything good throughout this entire game, so it really is just up to personal preference. I think Velia looked very nervous and outclassed. This was something I called out in my primer video. I talked about, like, hey, if Los Ratones are going to be competitive, it's probably because Velia is a lot better than I think he is. I think he's maybe the worst player in the LEC playing this split. He's just somebody that I think needs more time to grow. He obviously was good last year for Los Ratones during the beginning of the year, but when things really ramped up and teams really started trying harder in the back half, he really struggled down the stretch, and I did not see a translatable skill set for him, and unfortunately that is kind of coming through. The Baron fight in particular for Los Ratones was maybe as bad as it could possibly be. Crownie's positioning was awful. Velia's engage was terrible, so just not really what you're looking for. I think Baus looks like a player that is going to struggle at this level, not that that's going to surprise anyone either. Reckless and 0-0-0, and Nemesis was generally fine, just couldn't really do anything on the rise. Los Ratones do feel a bit outclassed, but it's Fnatic, who should be one of the better teams in the league, and I think they performed like that in day number one. We'll see how they play the rest of the week, but it's a nice start for them. Then moving on to our second game of day number one, and it was a matchup I was really excited to see. It was Shifters taking on GIANTX, and GX is going to pick up the victory here. They're going to start the year 1-0, and this was a banger, a back-and-forth game where both teams generally looked very good. Nuke looks super back into form. It looks like players like Rooster and Paddock and Trimby are feeling relatively comfortable for Shifters, but GX just had the best player on the Rift in this one, and that made it pretty easy for them to be able to win in these tense late-game fights. Unfortunately for Shifters, it really does feel like this jungle position is going to be a problem for them, at least at the moment. Isma was the better jungler in this game, and that's never really a great sign. Again, Isma, I think, has been playing a lot better as of late, ever since he joined GIANTX, but it's certainly not something you want to see consistently. But for GX, this was a team that people told me was way too low. People had them number 5 or number 6 in their power rankings. People had Shifters around number 9 in terms of where, you know, they were at, and I was kind of opposite on that. I was going against the grain, and it turns out the grain was probably a little bit more correct. I'm not going to read too much into a best of one, especially when that was so close, but GX looked very good in game number 1. Player of the game is obviously Noah. I mean, how could it possibly go to anyone else for how this game played out in the end? There's a lot of talk that's going to happen in this video about the AD carry position, because generally that's just the only thing that happens in my primer videos. If you're one of those people that said this guy's rage baiting for his AD carry rankings, well, tough stuff in week number 1. Some of my rankings look pretty darn good, and being super high on Noah and Jun, I think, is probably the best thing so far that we've talked about. Obviously, we'll get into the AD carry conversation a little bit more as we head along throughout the rest of this video, but Noah put the team on his back, absolutely 1v9'd in a lot of these fights. Not that the Rakan was not useful or the Xin Zhao wasn't setting things up. I think both of those things were true, but Noah was the one carrying these team fights, and if he was a weaker AD carry, if he was the kind of ADC that everybody said he was, where he's not on the same tier as players like Supa and Hansama, which I always have believed that he's kind of in that same zone, like if he wasn't that this game, they don't win. It really was as simple as that. He's still one of the better AD carries in the league. I think there is a big 5 right now in terms of of the ADCs in the LEC, and Noah is very much a part of that, at least from my perspective. He also has one of the better supports in the league right now in Jun, and I think he did everything he needed to do in the back half of the game. Not every single engage he made was perfect in this one, especially because you're playing off of things like Xin Zhao, Orianna that you want to make sure have the priority to be able to fight in these exchanges, and I think Jun was just a little bit over aggressive in some of these engages, but overall, he did everything he needed to do down the stretch, and he allowed his AD carry to step up and carry. Isma was solid here on the Xin Zhao. Lot was fine on the top side, not necessarily great or bad. Rumble's one of the Omega picks of the patch alongside Jace, and so it definitely was a little bit surprising to me to see him, you know, not exactly have the same kind of pressure, but Rooster is just a better player. And then Jackie still has some major question marks. He was completely gapped by Nuke. In terms of the way this game was played, it just did not matter. Credit to GX, nice win for them. And for Shifters, honestly, I'm not really coming out of this feeling all that bad about ranking them number 5. I think this was a good performance. If they had a better jungler, they'd probably win this game. It really does kind of come down to that. Noah was the best player on the Rift, but Nuke was very, very close in the mid lane. It really was a battle of titans here. If Nuke's going to be getting back into form, if he's going to play a lot closer to what he was in 2024, or even at the beginning of 2025, as opposed to maybe summer split 2025, I think that is really, really good news for Shifters because they need that kind of leader on the Rift. Paddock and Trimby look like they have good chemistry together. Trimby was playing something like Bard that he could be a bit more of a playmaker on. I would prefer him to play something more lane dominant because I want to see this team generate massive leads early. I think Trimby has been a great laner throughout his career, and he kind of showed that in the LTA South last year that he still got it. And I don't think they played towards their advantage enough. Noah was able to get online on the Kai'Sa, and that ended up being the big problem. Rooster was also solid. I think he was the better top laner. He just had a weaker champion in this game, but Bukata is not good enough right now. He is dud of the game for me. Again, I'm not going to try to put everything on him, but I think if they had a better jungler in this particular game, things do go quite differently. Wukong is a champion that can have a major impact when you have things like Azir and Bard to be able to capitalize on the setup that you have for him, or even if he's a secondary engage, you know, that could be fine. He just was so bad in these team fights that it ended up really costing Shifters. I'm not going to overreact to a best of one, but they looked pretty good, and it looks like players like Nuke and Paddock are in form, and that is massive for their success chances moving forward, but GX was just a little bit better, and quite frankly, I might have just completely, you know, missed the mark on putting GX so low at number 9. I thought there was going to be some regression, but I was still a big fan of the bot lane. I just don't like the top side. It might not even matter. If the bot lane is as good as I say they are, they're still probably a top 5 team in the league, and I think they showed that in game number 1. Then moving on to game number 3, and this was one that I was really excited to see because it's two young, interesting teams with fun promotions. It's Team Heretics taking on Na'Vi, and Na'Vi's gonna pick up the win here, and I'm gonna say it, I'm a little bit surprised by this. I really did not think Na'Vi was going to be all that competitive. Day number 1, I like Poby a lot, and I was super in on Rylek. I had him as my number 6 jungler in the entire league without him ever playing a single game. He's a top half jungler for me without even ever, you know, touching the Rift in tier number 1. I really believed in him that much, and you know what? He's paying that out, and then some right now. People told me I was too low on the bot lane. They were good in this one, but it was the top side that really ended up, you know, pushing Na'Vi forward, and for Heretics on the other side, man, their top side just completely collapsed. I thought Trayson was going to come in and look really good day number 1, and I don't think that necessarily happened here. Main tier was definitely better on the other side of this, and Sheo got Omega gapped by Rylek in this game. The gold difference in the jungle position was absolutely massive. Sheo playing one of his better champions in the Wukong, and Rylek looking like an LPL Kiana in this game. So credit to Na'Vi. I think they just played excellent, and I really want to spend most of this segment hyping them up because Rylek for me is going to get player of the game. What an awesome debut for him. I know I was incredibly high on him. I was very bullish about the way that I described him. I said he's like, if he to me is a better prospect than what Skewmond was in isolation coming out of BDS Academy. I think Skewmond obviously fit better on G2, and Skewmond has a better landing spot, so it's likely his career is going to be better. It's just the way that it goes. Like if a player like Rylek was on G2, you know, in the same way that Yike was, he's probably going to be a superstar. I wasn't quite sure that that was going to happen with a team like Na'Vi, but the raw talent of this guy is just immense. I think people are completely sleeping on the fact that this guy is one of the best jungle prospects to come through the ERLs, to come through EMEA Masters in quite some time, mostly because he didn't play in the summer split. Na'Vi signed him up, and they just couldn't get a visa in. They were blocking buyouts. They were holding on to this guy, knowing that they were going to start him in 2026 because they wanted to build their entire team and their entire culture around him in the jungle, and they are right to do so. This guy is just ridiculous in terms of his raw mechanics, and if he's going to play like this against a player like Sheo, who was one of the better junglers in the league last year, then that sells it, man. Like that is a pretty big ringing endorsement, I would say, for Rylek, basically from day number one. So looking as good as you could ever have hoped him to on something like Kiana. Mainter is the other player who looked fantastic in this game, and honestly, if you want to give Mainter player of the game, I'm not against that. Trayson was a player that I thought was going to come in and be better than Mainter day number one because he had a higher mechanical upside. I compared this to last year where Nako came in for Vitality as a top laner and Lot came in for GIANTX as a top laner. That to me felt like the Trayson versus Mainter debate where it's like one of them is just much more aggressive and one of them is probably going to be a lot more stable and a lot more team oriented. Well, Mainter was just better in the laning phase. Again, Trayson getting one of, I would say, the Omega picks of the patch right now in the Rumble on the top side, and Mainter just completely outplayed him. So the two rookies coming in of Mainter and Rylek, the best performing members of Navi. Poby continues to look solid. People were mad that I ranked him so high in the mid lane position. I think people are going to be surprised with how well he plays. And Samd and Paris were solid. They certainly weren't bad in this one. Paris, you know, obviously I was like in love with coming out of the ERLs in 2024. He just did not look good at all last year. And I don't want to sit there and say, oh, you know, just because he looks good at tier 2 means he will eventually look good at tier 1. It's really hard to predict that. But if he's on a team now with the top side that looks good and, you know, carries and Poby and Samd that are very stable, he now has the chance to be a bit more aggressive in the way that he plays. And I think a lot of his tendencies can probably come out a bit more. Navi looked awesome in game number 1 and Heretics did not. Like, I think that is the easy way to say it. Sheo looked terrible in the jungle. He got Omega gapped by Rylek. Like, the KDA does not indicate just how big the difference was between these two. There were, you know, 7k gold differences in the jungle at times in this game. It was just absurd how far behind Sheo was. And if Sheo's not going to be good for this team is not going to be good. Like, that is the end of the story here. I like their offseason. You know, I generally was very high on Heretics coming into the season because I really like Trayson. I think Ice and Stend make for a really interesting duo. Ice and Sheo had good chemistry when they were on BDS together, and Saren is much more stable than someone like Kamalu is, but man, none of that worked out. Again, Sheo is a huge piece of that puzzle, and Trayson is a really huge piece of that puzzle, and I don't think he was very good here in game number 1. Both of them are going to need to be better moving forward. Stend, I don't think, looked nearly as good as he did at times last year. There are just a lot of pieces that need to start performing better, and if a team like Navi is going to come out in game number 1 and be able to just kind of outclass you in some pivotal areas, and your main characters, your main carries are just not performing well, that is a bit of a worry for Heretics. We need to see what happens the rest of the week, but for now, they don't look all that good on day 1, and for Navi, they look as good as you could want, especially the rookies coming in on the top side. They are the most important players towards Navi's success, and right now they are passing with flying colors. Then moving on to our 4th game, and this was a fun one because it's kind of a matchup between two similar, you know, team identities, two veteran-led teams that have some young pieces. It was Vitality taking on SK Gaming, and Vitality is going to pick up the victory. They look much better than SK do in this game. SK look quite disjointed in terms of the way that they end up wanting to play, and Vitality has a much clearer identity in terms of how they want to play the map. A couple of the players we wanted to see stepped up, and generally, I think they had better hands than SK in this game. This honestly isn't all that complicated of a breakdown. I think we're going to talk about some of SK's problems, perhaps listening to the community a little too much in the way that they ended up drafting. So we'll go ahead and go into it. First and foremost, player of the game, there are a lot of good options here. Linsas got it on the broadcast. I think that makes a lot of sense. Carzzy was really good on the Corki, although I didn't really consider him. I think that scoreline is mostly because the team was really stepping up around him and allowing him to pop off. I think Nako was much better than Wunder on the top side. Humanoid was much better than his scoreline would indicate, basically the opposite of Carzzy in this one. Not that Carzzy was bad. I'm not trying to say he was terrible, just that Humanoid was one of the better players on the Rift, and for me, player of the game is going to go to Fleshy in the support position. I think he was the best player on the Rift in terms of the way that he was creating and setting things up for the rest of the team. Linsas was great on the Pantheon. Humanoid, again, also heavily considered here on the Taliyah, but I wanted to go with someone that I think made the biggest impact, and to me, that was the Rakan. I think almost every engage he went for was massive. I think he was in the right place at the right time. Mickey X was spending so much time trying to get the Victor for leader online in the mid lane, and it just was not working out. Fleshy, I think, was much more proactive and productive with a lot of the resources he was using, and generally he had a much bigger impact on the game as a whole. So wanted to give him a lot of credit. He is a big piece for Vitality that kind of needs to step up if they want to reach their ambitions of being around top 5 or even competing for top 4. And I think he did that in this one. I think he showed that he can be that kind of player. We always knew it was in him, but I'm just excited to see it come through. Linsas continues to be on an upward trajectory for his career, a player that I really liked in Tier 2 that I basically had given up on in Tier 1 for a little bit. Last year, though, completely reignited and revitalized me, kind of being like, okay, maybe there's something here, and I think he was also very good on the Pantheon. We'll talk about Skeens on the other side. We talked about Rumble being one of the Omega picks. Like, Jace is just so much stronger than every other champion in the game right now coming out of the jungle position. He can do a bit of everything, and Skeens Skeens gets him in this game, it just does not have the impact that maybe you would want to see out of him getting what is almost certainly the strongest champion at the moment. Humanoid was great on the Talia. He was playing the map super well. I think he was opening up a lot of lanes for both Linzos and Fleshy to be more aggressive with their engages. If Humanoid is going to be locked in and playing like this, even with a lot of pressure pumped into him by Mikyx, that is incredibly huge for Vitality. That could be a big game changer. And like I said, Karzi and Knock were also solid. Knock was much better than Wunder on the top side, although I think much of that had to do with Wunder, which is why we're, pivoting over to SK Gaming here and talking about Wunder just being terrible for this team in this game. He's done of the game, and it's not particularly close. If he is going to play like this, we talked about SK being a veteran-led team. I think that is putting it maybe lightly. We'll talk about Yopa in a little bit. I do think that he's obviously an interesting player, and I think he actually had really good mechanics in this game. Even Skeens had some decent moments. Leader had a ton of tempo and pressure put into him by SK. He was clearly the win condition for this team right now, but I'll talk about why that was a huge mistake in terms of the way they played the map. But if the veterans are going to play bad, if Mikyx is going to be making questionable decisions like putting all his resources into Victor in the mid lane and completely ignoring his Yunara, who is the actual win condition of this game, or if a player like Wunder is just going to constantly be dying over and over again on the Mbessa, then yeah, SK is not going to be particularly good, and I think that is the most frustrating thing. Wunder was awful. Knock wasn't even all that dominant in this game. He was playing well. I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but it wasn't like, oh, Knock just had one of those games, and Wunder, getting back into the LEC needed some time to adjust. Like, he was just making a ton of mistakes on his own. No one was forcing those mistakes out of him, so that is definitely the biggest concerning piece, and like I said for Mickey, he just had some really questionable decisions on the map in this one. I've talked about it before, odd even year Mikyx split. Hopefully we're not getting that terrible Mikyx year that sometimes comes with the even year in 2024 and 2022. I think those are maybe his two weakest years of his entire career, so hopefully 2026 ends up breaking that trend. Yopa, though, did look good, and Leader played his Victor in the mid lane. People have been criticizing him being able to not play control mages, and he was like, well, watch this. I'm going to play Victor, get all the resources, and carry. And what happened is he played Victor, got all of the resources in the world, and the enemy mid laner was still much more effective and relevant on the map than he was, which is never really a good sign. He got donated so many kills and so many resources in this game, and it still didn't really turn into anything. I don't know if SK is going to be good, guys. Like, if they're going to play like this, it's going to be a pretty big uphill battle, but this is a nice win for Vitality, and I think specifically Linzos, Humanoid, and Fleshy, the three best performing members of the team in this game, they're the ones that I was the most concerned about needing to step up. Linzos needs to continue that upward trajectory, continuing to be one of the better junglers in the league. Humanoid needs to come back with a vengeance and show that he's not the player he was at the end of his tenure on Fnatic, and if Fleshy can take that leap as well on the bottom side, you have a real scary team here that could pretty easily be top 6 in Vitality. But then moving on to our 5th game of the day, and it is a civil war between the same organization. It's K-Corp Blue taking on K-Corp, and K-Corp beats K-Corp. I mean, what else is there to say? K-Corp Blue goes down. This is a decently competitive game because Yukino actually is a really interesting player. I think Hazel and Prime looked okay in this one, all things considered, but was there ever any doubt on the direction that this game was going to go in? I mean, if KC Blue ended up beating KC, that would have been one of the funniest things that happened all year long in the LEC. If you get beat by your academy team, that's how you know there has to be some changes coming in, especially a team in KCB that, we'll talk about them a bit later on in the week. I think they look a lot better than, their worst expectations could have hoped, but you have multiple players coming up that have never even played in Tier 2 before. Tao in the top lane, Hazel in the AD carry role. These are not Tier 2 players. Yukino, Kamalu, Prime, like these are players that do have some experience and obviously, could get some looks at the LEC. Yukino especially, Kamalu was in the LEC last year, but like this is not a team that theoretically should be competing for anything, and so the fact that they put up a fight here, I think, is a good look for them, all things considered. But K-Corp was better, and they certainly had more proactivity on the map. Busio, for me, is going to get player of the game. We'll see how Busio ends up progressing as a member of KC and how he plays throughout his time in the LEC, but giving this guy Bard in his first ever game here, maybe not the best strategy for KCB to try and pick up a victory against their in-house rivals. Maybe they just wanted to get Busio a game where he could show off and play his best champion, but, certainly not something that I think you want to do if you want to beat that team. It was just a really great performance from him. He's always great on Bard, and I think his debut in the LEC went just about as well as you could have expected. Other players on the team that I think played well, I think Khalees looked solid on the Ezreal, but really it was Yehu in the mid lane that also looked very encouraging to me. I think he did a really good job of capitalizing on a lot of positioning mistakes coming out from Kamalu. Basically every single time that Kamalu overstepped, which he does quite a lot, talked about that a lot on Heretics last year in the LEC, Yehu was there to, try and punish it, to get Yike into the action and to really make the most out of that mid lane aggression. One of the big things I was concerned about is that Yehu's big positive traits over in Korea were his shot calling ability, his communication, his teamwork, and generally the way that he played off of his jungler. That was the thing that always kind of got him jobs on DRX over and over again, and I didn't know how that was going to progress into the LEC when there might be a language barrier, when there certainly is a bit of a culture barrier, getting used to playing in a new region, you know, all of that stuff. Like, obviously he can adapt, but, you know, how was it going to look day number one? And it looked really good. He was doing everything that he did in the LCK, I should say, which is set up for his jungler to be able to take all the credit. Yike was not very good in this game. Yukino had a ton of pressure and honestly, at times was even better than Yike, but still was able to capitalize when Yehu or even Bucio would set things up. Kana was solid on the top side. Tao had a terrible game on the Aatrox. K-Corp looked like you would have expected them to. The only negative here is that I wanted to see Yike play better, but hopefully he can get into form at some point. For KCB on the other side, they also looked relatively good. Like, this is not a team that should be competing with their, you know, better half kind of team, if you will. The fact that they were even in this and able to generate some resources, the fact that you could argue that Yukino was outpacing Yike in terms of how this jungle matchup was going, I think is just really, really funny. North American talent really showing out in this game here between both of these teams. But dud of the game for me is going to go to Kamalu in the mid lane. Like I said, while he was able to pick up some kills and some resources, he was getting punished over and over again on the Taliyah. They were relying on him to be able to create out of the mid lane position and to be able to, you know, use that Vi Taliyah combo to be able to tempo out and snowball the game. And Kamalu was just making way too many positioning mistakes to really be able to push the game forward. I feel bad for Yukino because even he had to pay for some of Kamalu's mistakes in this game, but overall, it is what it is. Kamalu was making a lot of these mistakes last year. Tao was also terrible on the top side. This is a player that I just have no clue how he's going to play in tier number 1. He is by far the least experienced player on this entire team. If he's even remotely good, that is a miracle. Hazel and Prime were solid. Prime was stealing a lot of kills on the Nautilus, which is never ideal, but Hazel, I think, was positioning well. It's just that Kaliste and especially Bucio were much more proactive on the map, and so it's really hard to kind of get a full grounded opinion of how they ended up playing. Yukino was the star of KCB, and he continues to look like a player that deserves to be in tier 1 right now for the entirety of the year. But at the end of the day, this was an expected victory for K-Corp. I don't think it really showcases like the dominance that you want to see out of them. You wanted to see them kind of destroy this game a little bit more consistently, but I think there were some good signs. Bucio looked solid, and Yehu, I think in particular, also kind of stood out in a positive way. Those are good signs for K-Corp, but hopefully they can look even better moving forward. But then moving on to our final game of day number 1, game number 6, and it was the biggest game of the day on paper. It was Movistar KOI taking on G2, and Movistar KOI is going to pick up a pretty massive 1-0 victory here. Obviously, it's 1-0, it's best of 1, but this is a really nice win. It was super clean. They were better in basically every area of the game. This wasn't like some of the other games that we've talked about already today, where it felt like both teams were in it. KOI got a big lead in the early game, and they never really let it go. They utilized a lot of the power picks of the patch, like the Jace in the jungle, and of course, as we've talked about, Taliyah and Yunara as your obviously mid AD carry duo to really separate themselves and kind of push themselves forward, and basically everybody executed just about as well as you could have hoped from them here in this game. For G2 on the other side, they just weren't as good. Like, there's really not a lot to talk about. Like, Skumond, I think, played fine on the Wukong. There were moments where he was getting out-tempoed, and in fact, I think generally speaking, he got out-tempoed, but most of that has to do with the champion matchup more than the way Skumond ended up playing. He's just a bit of a slower player naturally. Everybody else on the team, though, I think made some pretty massive mistakes that ended up really putting G2 behind, and, you know, there's some stuff to talk about here. So let's get into it. Elyoya, for me, is going to get player of the game, although I understand why the broadcast gave it to Supa. We will talk about that in a second, because there is some small victory lapping that I will do, not only in this game, but throughout the rest of this video for some of my AD carry rankings, as I've already teased. But Elyoya was excellent here. Jace is a champion that I think is just so omega strong right now, and to see somebody be able to pilot it in the LEC, I think is a really good sign. This is what this champion does at a high-end level. If you are able to land every single one of your abilities, if you are constantly pressuring out lanes, then he's going to win you every lane in the game. Like, he just is going to massively put your team ahead. His clear speed is very good, and obviously his skirmish potential is incredibly high. Jace is super overpowered right now. The fact that G2 were willing to give this over, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. I'll talk about it in a second. G2's meta read, and we'll talk about this throughout the week as well, seems to be quite bad right now. They seem to have a much different idea of the way that the game is played on the current patch and in the new year than with the new systems than, you know, basically every other team in the world. So Elyoya got to take advantage of that with the Jace. He did not miss this game. He hit every single skill shot. Supa is the other player that I think really was exceptional. He got broadcast player of the game. He was taking over these fights on Yunara by the time the late game ended up coming through. The reason I give player of the game to Elyoya is I feel like he impacted the game more to get there, whereas Supa was more so kind of the one that got to capitalize on a good game state. Not to say that Supa was bad at all, but, you know, small victory lap here. I'm not going to fully take a victory lap because Hans Hama fans are going to continue to pester me in the comment section as it's just going to be for the rest of time. You know, I'll get called a rage baiter or whatever, but I put Hans Hama below Supa, and Supa was just better than Hans Hama in this game, just as he was in the Spring Split Finals, so it just is what it is, right? Like, they're at the bare minimum, they're on the same tier, and I think games like this end up proving it. More importantly, I would say, Jojo Pune, I think, was able to draw a lot of aggro in this game and not completely sell the game, which is not always how he ends up playing. Alvaro is not even on a playmaker, something that KOI really required last year, not because that's the only thing that Alvaro plays, but more so because this team really relies on Alvaro being a primary initiator and engager for the team, especially from behind. He got to play Lulu in this game, which really is a pick that I think is going to rise in popularity. I think enchanters are really good right now because you want to try and snowball the game as much as possible. Late game is just less consistent right now than early game is if you can get that early lead because it's so much easier to snowball. So I think things like Lulu are going to rise in popularity, and that pairs really well with Yunara because it's not like Lulu falls off in the late game when you're playing with a hyper carry anyways. So KOI with a good meta read and a really well-played game, Elyoya and Supa in particular, even Alvaro to an extent, really pushing their team forward. And for G2, I mean, they just got outplayed. They made a lot of mental mistakes in this one, and quite frankly, their players were not as good as KOI's were on the other side. It's best of one, so you don't want to panic or freak out too much, but, you know, this is kind of the G2 I expected to see out of the gate. The part that concerns me is the meta read. They're locking into Gnar, Wukong, Azir, Corki in game number 1, and it's like, hey guys, have you not seen some of the changes to the game? It's just so much harder to scale than it was last year, right? It's so much harder to play these comps that don't really have a bridge into the mid game. Like, you're relying so much on the Wukong and the Corki to be able to get pressure early, and that's into Jace, and that's into Talia, and it's into Lulu, who's never going to be out pressured in the 2v2 in the bot lane, and it just really feels like G2 have no part of the map that they actually can play through, and they lost all of the tempo in the world early game for it. Again, we'll talk about this a bit more later on in the week, but G2's meta read right now just does not seem to be particularly good, and I think it's costing them. But dud of the game for me is actually going to go to their star, Caps, in the mid lane. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Caps. He's the best player in the region. I think that's completely fair to say. He's the best, you know, European player of all time, right? Like, I'm not trying to shit on Caps here for those of you who have not been around the channel, but Caps got mind controlled in this game. There's nothing else really to say. He fell for the Jojo Pune mind control. I mean, he completely sold the game by constantly looking to kill this Talia and then not really doing any damage in team fights, and I think that was the biggest problem for G2. If you're going to build around this front to back like a Azir Corki combo comp with all of this engage coming out from Wukong and Gnar and Alistar that can really set things up, then your Azir has to do damage, and it really felt like Caps did not get the memo. He tried to play hero ball here, and he succumbed to what I have coined on this channel as LEC Azir syndrome, because it seems like every single mid laner in the LEC, when they pick Azir, they're allergic to doing damage, and they feel like they have to go for the hero engage and be the big Shuriman and shuffle guy, and sometimes it's easier when you have 3 other engaged threats on the team to just sit there and do damage on this champion, and unfortunately, I just don't think Caps played well towards the end of this game. I think you could give this to Broken Blade. 0-4-0 was not particularly good, although I don't think all of that was his fault on the Gnar. Lebrav was not good in this game. I think having to play Alistar into Lulu made his life a living hell and never really got back on board. Hans Hama was super behind the 8 ball in terms of the way the game was played. It's not entirely his fault, but Supa was much better than him in this one. Skewmon was really the only player with any tempo, and Elyoya had much more tempo on the other side. G2 just did not look in it. This was a clear 5v5 gapping from KOI, and I think that's a really good sign for KOI. If they can keep this up, like, this is the kind of performance that showcases they can be champions once again in the LEC this year, and that would be really exciting for this organization. Then moving on now to day number 2, our middle day of the week here, and we kicked off day 2 with a matchup between Team Heretics and Shifters. That Shifters are going to pick up a win, and it's their first win under the new name, the new brand, as BDS has renamed themselves, and they looked good in this one. I will say, they probably took a little bit too long. This game was exceptionally boring to watch, but I don't really care about boring. I really care about clean on this channel, as much as I'd love to sit here and say that I wish every team could constantly win and be exciting while they do so. As an analyst, and my job here to talk about teams that are doing well and not doing well, whether it was fun or not is not really something that I have to take into account too much. Shifters had full control of this game. They took a little bit too long to close out, but ended up getting there eventually. Heretics look completely lost right now. This team does not look good. Whatever positivity I had to say about them going in to the year, it is gone, because it is just, I mean, it's 2 best of ones. Like, you don't want to panic too much, right? And I want to continue to really stress that 2 best of ones are not a good indicator as to how good a team actually is, especially when you're introducing a lot of new players into an organization with a new coaching staff, all of that stuff. But Heretics look about as bad as you can right now in terms of the small sample size, the 2-game sample size. So hopefully they can start to turn things around. For Shifters, player of the game for me, kind of up for debate. Nuke is the one who's going to get it because I think Nuke was the most consistent and certainly the player that I think is elevating a lot of the macro of what Shifters is doing. Nuke is the star of this team, and that's becoming clearer and clearer every single time we watch him. He is playing like the version of him that we wanted to see. The first 2 games have looked excellent from him. Hopefully he can keep it up. A player that I've been really high on in the past and, started to fall off of at the end of last year. It looks like he's getting back into form now that he's once again the #1 option on this team. But Paddock and Trimby, I think, also looked very good in this game. Massive bot gap out of these two, and part of that was Ice and Sten just not having any sort of cohesion and looking really bad as a duo, and we'll talk about that plenty when we get to the Heretics section. But you got to give credit to Paddock and Trimby. Trimby in particular, I really considered for player of the game. Even the fake, the bait from Rel was really game breaking and game warping in terms of being able to put Shifters into a good spot. So really happy to see that Trimby has come back to the LEC with just as much, I guess, aggression and willingness to try to make plays as he had when he left it. He was previously on Team Heretics, of course, for a very short amount of time, but was on that team. It's nice to see him come back and play really well. Paddock looks like he's adjusting well. His mechanics have not necessarily been as dominant as maybe I thought they would be. I thought his laning would be, exceptionally good because his hands are really, his designated trait. He's a super aggressive player, but he's really settled in as, this really stable ADC through the first 2 games with Nuke as kind of the primary creator and primary playmaker. If Paddock is the #2 option and actually fills that role without completely throwing the game away, that's pretty massive for Shifters. So really nice to see that there. Rooster is showing a lot of the mechanics that have me placing him as a top 3 top laner. He was #3 for me in terms of top laners coming into the year, and he is performing like it. Part of that is Trayson just not even trying on the top side, but it is what it is. Bukata is going to be the weak link of this team, but even he was fine enough in this game. It's more so the other pieces around him. It looks like mid lane is going to be great. It looks like top lane is going to be great, and the bot lane looks like it's going to be solid. And that was the reason why I ranked this team so high. They even looked competitive in their first series or their first game loss on day #1 to GIANTX. So good start for Shifters here. And then for Heretics on the other side, a terrible start. They look like one of the worst teams in the entire league, maybe the worst of the actual LEC teams right now. Of course, it's only 2 games, so you don't want to panic, but this bot lane is not synergizing. Ice, for me, is the easy choice for dead of the game. Obviously, going against his former organization here that's renamed into Shifters. He played Smolder, and he looked like he was completely lost on this champion. He is a late-game hyper carry type of specialist player. He is definitely someone that I think, prefers this style. If you're going to play scaling, it's going to be Team Heretics, right? It's just kind of the way that this team wants to play. But Ice and Stend are playing awful in the 2v2 in the bot lane, and that is going to derail any thoughts of Ice actually scaling into the later part of the game. If you're giving so many resources over to the enemy AD carry, if you're allowing the enemy support to roam all the time, it's just not going to be particularly playable for the team. And Ice looks very bad. Stend looks much worse than he did last year. It just looks like a very bad combination right now on the bottom side. That's with Saren, I think, playing fine on the Azir Sheo, at least making plays on the Pantheon. The middle of the map was actually fine in this game, which was not the case the first time they played on day #1. It was the bot side that just completely sold things. Trayson's also not looking good, man. This guy's holding Rumble for next game, I guess. I don't really understand how people are so bad at playing Rumble in the LEC right now, but every single game I've watched of him so far this week has been quite bad. Hopefully people can figure it out. Trayson was a player I was really excited for. It is not looking good right now in a very small sample size. The rest of the team is a bit of a disaster, so I don't want to put too much on him, but it's not looked good so far, so hopefully he can figure things out. Again, Knock Knocko also had a bit of a slow start last year, although the mechanics were coming through. Those were the players that I compared a lot. Hopefully Trayson can start to get on, command, because I think he's a great player here, but right now, Heretics look bad. They, again, look like maybe the worst LEC team in the LEC right now, K-Corp Blue, Los Ratones team. But Shifters look really good. Even in their loss to GIANTX, they had the chance to be able to win that. They just threw the game away late. And here, Nuke continues to look great. The bot lane is playing well. Rooster looks as advertised in lane. Shifters could be a top 6 or 5 team in the league. I think that my ranking of them maybe wasn't too inaccurate, and maybe finally I'm actually going to be right to be high on this org. Then moving on to our second game of day #2, and this was a pretty fun matchup, one that I was really looking forward to seeing. It was Los Ratones taking on K-Corp Blue, the 2 provisional teams, I guess, here in the LEC from Tier 2. And Corp Blue are going to pick up the victory here. This is a bit surprising to me, but it's not like shocking, right? I put KCB at 12 and LR at 11, mostly because KCB had a couple of players on the team that I just had no clue how they were going to play. As it turns out, LR probably have the weakest players in the entire league right now, specifically in the jungle position. Yukino was definitely gapping the jungle opponent, and there are a couple of players on KCB, Prime in particular, that are looking very, very good right now with limited tier 1 experience. So let's get into it, man. Prime is player of the game. Prime looks awesome right now. I know it's only been 2 games, but he actually looked pretty solid against Corp in their first matchup. He didn't look phenomenal, but he was at the very least making plays. I just wish he stole less kills on the Nautilus in that game. You know, going into Busio is always a troubling affair, but I think generally he performed admirably, and then he comes out here in series number 2, and he's awesome. He's completely creating everything for the team across the map. He's opening up angles for Camelou and Hazel to be able to really dominate. You know, Tao was really far ahead on the top side of the map, and that really helped things out. Of course, Yukino was as well in the jungle, but Prime really was the glue to bring everything together. Like I said, there are 2 players on this team that are showing, like, oh, you might be tier 1 caliber right now, and Prime is definitely one of them. I think he has come out of this, you know, small stint, at least over the course of these 2 games, actually looking pretty good. We'll see how he closes out week number 1. Yukino is, of course, the other player here. 2-2-10 does not do him justice. This guy, Flame Horizon Velia, in terms of the jungle matchup. That's with Velia selling the game to try and steal camps multiple different times in this one on Jarvan. Yukino still was Flame Horizoning him. He was still creating more on the map. Like, this was a fantastic game from Yukino, and honestly, if there's any takeaway from Corp Blue, it's that Yukino on FlyQuest this year would have been a pretty massive addition, and the fact that this guy might be playing in tier 2 for a majority of the year is tough, because he is really, really good. Like, he is potentially, you know, right up there. I'm not going to say he's as good as someone like Rylek, obviously, but, like, as a rookie, he would be in that same kind of conversation. I underrated him by only putting him at number 10 in my jungle rankings. He is clearly a lot better than that. Rest of the team played well here. Tao was definitely winning on the top side. People are going to point to the solo kill he got onto Baus. That's obviously a really nice pickup for him. Zehen is a very strong champion, but he was really far ahead before that anyways. So glad to see Tao, who is, for all intents and purposes, the player with the least amount of competitive experience in the entire league right now. Glad to see him, you know, showing up, at least in a matchup that he can win. Camelou and Hazel, I think, look solid enough. Like, KCB just looked good in this game. Do I think they are a good team? Probably not. Like, they played Corp decently tough, and obviously they beat LR here, but LR's probably the worst team in the entire league, and KCB, you know, obviously versus KC is, you know, one of those matchups where it's just hard to kind of tell how much each team knows about each other, and, you know, how often they're scrimming and all of that stuff. Like, it's not necessarily a stage matchup kind of thing where there's a ton to take away. At least so far, they've looked pretty good. Like, this could be a top 10 or top 9 team in the league if everything were to work out for them. But LR, unfortunately, right now are clearly bottom 1 in terms of the way that they're playing. And I hate to single out a player because it really does feel reductive to say that it's one player's fault. And it's not. There are a lot of things going wrong for this team. But Velia is not good. He's not a tier 1 player right now, man. He's dud of the game here for me in the jungle position. I said this in my primer, and I always wish to be wrong when I say things like this in a primer or in a player rankings video, but when I was talking about Velia, I said, hey, you know, I think Nemi's good. I think Reckless is good. I think Crowny was good, except for the fact that he's constantly doing the ruler thing and getting caught in the mid game. Like, to me, the problem on this team is I just don't think that Velia is an LEC caliber jungler. I don't think he's ready to play in tier 1, and I hate being right about that. Like, I hate when I'm negative about a player and it turns out to be correct, but he's just not a tier 1 caliber player. He is not close to this level yet. He is somebody who I think needs a ton more time in tier 2 to develop and to continue to grow. He is probably the weakest player in the LEC right now, and I think that that is a tough place to land in a meta where I think jungle is arguably more important than it's been in a very long time. I mean, he's just constantly making mental mistakes. He's down in farm. He's down in pressure. He's not really doing anything on the map. His engages are super ill-advised. It just feels like he's not playing well, and maybe it's nerves. Maybe it's something else, right? Maybe it's not just gameplay, but we saw the shades of this in tier 2 last year. He was not a particularly great jungler in tier 2 last year, and there's no real surprise that he goes up to a tier 1 level, and even players like Yukino without tier 1 experience are being able to take advantage of him. So it's just unfortunate. Velia's not looked good. Baus is getting a lot of credit for this game. I don't know, man. I think his laning is just too bad to function at the LEC level. I think he does a lot of interesting things, and he made some nice plays in the late game to be able to keep things close. I think if you're losing to Tao, like this is the one matchup that you're supposed to be like winning consistently, and that's not a good sign. I think Crownie looked okay. Reckless didn't really get to do anything on the map, but he's playing Nami. I think Nami is playable, but your team and your jungler especially have to be in a good spot. And Nemesis, I think generally was fine. Again, not great, but like generally okay. Like LR have maybe pieces on this team, but I'm sorry, like if the jungle position is going to play like this, it's gonna be real hard to win games. Like tempo was just completely gone for LR. For KCB on the other side, though, again, you have a couple of players here that I think are really intriguing, really interesting, and hopefully can get some more time. Prime and Yuki now, I think both have looked very good at the start of this split, and they're kind of players that I think you can rely on to potentially push KCB into a better spot than I ever predicted them to be in. Then moving on to our third game of day number 2, and it's a good one. Another really important matchup. It was Team Vitality taking on Na'Vi, and Na'Vi is once again going to pick up another victory. They start 2-0 to this split, and they have 2 really nice wins over some teams that I did not expect them to beat. They look even better than I could have ever anticipated from day number 1. Mostly it's the players that, you know, I highlighted as being really big pieces. Again, I hate taking like constant victory laps on this channel, but you know, in the LEC it feels a little bit more earned just because of the sheer amount of dissenting opinions that tend to come through on the LEC videos, whereas like, you know, some of the other regions I feel like I'm closer to consensus, not so much. And right now, I don't know, man, the primer's looking pretty good, or at the very least the player rankings and the actual takes in the primer look pretty good. Na'Vi being way too low does not look good, but we'll touch upon that because Vitality, I mean, this is Vitality, man. Like they go out there and they look awesome on one day and they look terrible on another. Like get used to this, man. This is going to be what this team looks like for the rest of the year. I cannot stress this enough. Vitality are either going to dominate a game and look fantastic, or they are going to get run off the Rift because their 2 main carries are both super inconsistent and they're not going to be even competitive against bad teams. Like it's just the way that it functions with the way that they built this roster. Unfortunately, the coin flipped in a bad direction for them on day number 2, but Na'Vi was the beneficiary of that. And boy, player of the game was tough because it could go to so many people. There were 3 that I really wanted to narrow it down to. I gave it to Poby in the mid lane. We'll talk about the mid lane gap here. Super excited to have hyped up Poby so much in the primer. There are some things that I want to talk about that I just think people forget about in terms of Poby. Rylek in the jungle, who is everything he was advertised to be, and then some. Another player that I think I really nailed in that player rankings video, again, being a top 6 jungler. I know people were not, you know, a fan of that in the rankings, but I don't know, man. I might have put him too low. This guy might be even better than that day number 1. And the player that I'm most excited that I was kind of wrong about is Paris in the support position, who's looked fantastic through the first 2 games. This is a player I was really hoping and praying was going to get back on track, and it does feel like he has done so. But let's talk about Poby here, as he is my player of the game. You know, people did not like that I put Poby as my number 4 mid laner, that I put him, you know, as a pretty high piece in the LEC mid lane rankings, because this guy apparently has this really bad track record, and, you know, I was wrong for saying he saved Fnatic season. I think where a lot of the difference in opinion comes from is this idea that Poby, I should say, this is a permeating idea that came from last year, that Poby was not a great tier 2 player in the Challengers League, that this was like a guy who got offers because he was Faker's understudy, or, you know, because he was like, you know, playing in the LCK for a little bit for T1, like all of that stuff, that, oh, you know, he actually wasn't that good of a tier 2 player. And for the most part in his career, I would have agreed with you, but the problem with that is that 2025 was his breakout year. Go and watch him in winter and in spring in the LCK Challengers League. That's the best he's ever played. He was genuinely a massive piece for that team in tier 2. It seemed like he had finally figured out how to lane consistently and how to generate leads early, and that's when he got brought over to the LEC. That's why I was excited about Poby being brought over. I was actually against this idea that he was overrated and that he was only getting picked up as a T1 understudy, because I think while that often is the case for mid lane players on T1 challengers, like that was not the case for Poby, who really showcased at the beginning of last year that he is a very interesting prospect, and he has become that in the LEC. His mechanics are fantastic. He understands the game really well. He plays the map incredibly well. It's just all there. Poby is one of the best mid laners in the league, and I don't think there's a ton to deny at this point in terms of the tape. Him and Rylek are a terrifying duo in terms of the mid jungle, because Rylek is as advertised. This guy is maybe the most mechanically talented jungler in the league. Like, it's actually insane how good his mechanics are. As long as he can start to play like a little bit more controlled, like, you know, obviously he's gotten to play Kiana and Mbessa in his first 2 games, but as long as we know he can play for the rest of his team at some point, like, this guy could be a monster at this level. I truly do believe he was that kind of prospect, and he has shown everything he needs to. Paris looks great. Sam D looks great here as kind of that third option, the tertiary option in the AD carry role. That's the best possible situation for a player like Sam D, who I think can be really stable, but isn't necessarily a game breaker in terms of his mechanics. And Mainter also looks great on the top side. Na'Vi look as good as you could have ever hoped. Best case scenario right now for this org. And then for Vitality on the other side, like, you just have to accept that this is part of who you signed up for, right? Like, Humanoid and Karzi as a duo, even Nako on the top side, right? Although this game is not his fault at all. Like, Humanoid and Karzi as a duo, they're going to have games where they look good, and they're going to have games where they look bad. Humanoid was awful here. He is dud of the game. He was completely outclassed by Poby. This is vintage Humanoid, right? Like, this is how he plays every so often, and I just think people forget about that because they remember the good moments at international tournaments, in the playoffs, but this is what regular season Humanoid has looked like for a consistent amount of time, where he looks really good on the Taliyah in day number 1, and then he just stops trying. He starts losing on day number 2, and it's just frustrating. Like, yeah, you know, there's not really a ton to say. I've already gone in depth on this at length throughout other splits, but Humanoid was not good here. I think Karzi made a couple of mistakes as well, although he was the one with all the gold to keep them in this. Linsas was super behind in terms of tempo. Nako was really good. He was generating leads for himself in the laning phase and then was trying to make an impact elsewhere, but by that time, the game was completely over. There was absolutely nothing else to do on the map. So Vitality just, you know, losing a game in the way that we expected them to, with one of their veterans just randomly trolling, and then Na'Vi, again, they look as good as they could have ever been expected to look. Like, this looks like one of the more interesting teams in the league, a team around like top 6. Like that would be insane if they're able to achieve that day number 1, but they absolutely look like they're in that kind of vicinity right now. Then moving on to our 4th game of day number 2, we are officially in the back half of the week here, and we kicked off the back half of the week with a bit of a rivalry between SK Gaming and Fnatic, and SK Gaming are going to pick up the big victory here. This is an old-time rivalry of organizations. You know, back in 2013, 2014, this was a massive rivalry in LoL Esports for those of us who go back that far, obviously. You know, I know not everybody who's following League these days goes back to, you know, the good old days of the introduction of the EU LCS, but SK and Fnatic were 2 of the big European powerhouses back in the day, 2 of the big rivals, and it looks like that might be reignited. Mickey X, Wunder, Leader, all of these players now going against Fnatic. It's really exciting to see that they really locked in and stepped up, because this was a demolition. They were just better than Fnatic in this game, and for Fnatic, I mean, this is just not a good look, right? Like, they had a couple of players who I think played really bad, and, you know, a couple of, I can't even say players that played well. There really weren't a lot of plays that went well for them. Upset and Lospa look okay on the bottom side of the map, but really, this comes down to a solo lane gap from SK Gaming. That is really the easiest way to kind of talk about what ended up happening here. Wunder, for me, is going to get player of the game, although I think you could give it to Leader in the mid lane. If you would have told me that Wunder and Leader were going to gap Fnatic on Kennen and Ryze in 2026, it just would have been the most insane sentence you could have possibly told me. Just a ridiculous game from both of these players. Wunder just ends up completely dominating team fights because he's able to generate a pretty big lead for himself in the early game. We'll talk about Impiros in a second. We expected some growing pains, we'll just say, from Impiros. I talked about that in the primer. I didn't think his tape necessarily suggested a player that was going to immediately be able to dominate. He was oftentimes weak side, never really had a ton of responsibility at the tier 2 level. And I wanted to see Fnatic try and protect him early on. He did not get protected in this game. Wunder really abused him. And if Wunder's going to play like this as opposed to whatever he was on day number 1, yeah, that's going to change the equation of what SK Gaming could be. I don't know if I'm willing to buy into this team just yet, but man, the middle of the standings right now looks really, really interesting if teams like if teams like this are going to play like this. Leader goes deathless, 6-0-12 on the rise in this game. So much for all that talk about how he can only play melee assassins. You know, obviously this guy came out with a presence in week number 1 and wanted to prove people wrong. Plays the Victor on day number 1. They perma-camp him and he still can't really get anything going. And then obviously on day number 2, things go a lot better. Vladi was not nearly as good as Leader in this game, which I never would have expected to say. Really nice stuff from the 2 solo laners. They were definitely the carries for SK Gaming. I do want to give some credit to Yopa as well, though, in the AD carry role. I think this guy's a bit underrated with how much he is able to do from that ADC position. He wasn't a carry. He wasn't dominating in terms of, like, the damage, although his damage was incredibly high in this game on the Varus. His positioning is just really solid. Like he is a really stable, really interesting player to watch, and I think he is a good addition to this team. I'm really excited to see how that goes moving forward. Skeens was better than Razork. Mickey was obviously very active on the map. SK looked good in this game. The question is more so, can they maintain it rather than can their best game games look pretty good because we kind of knew that their best games are going to look pretty good, but this was a really, really nice showcase from them. And then for Fnatic, this is a pretty bad loss. This is probably a game you need to win if you're Fnatic, especially after the day number 1. Like, obviously you dominate Los Ratones, but Los Ratones are probably the worst team in the entire league right now. To come out and, you know, beat Los Ratones, but then look really bad against SK, it doesn't exactly ignite this, like, really big positive feeling for me in what Fnatic can be, especially when the solo laners aren't looking so good. But it's less on Imperios, even though he is dud of the game, right? Like, I think he was the worst player on the Rift here. I think top lane gap was the biggest in the entire game. We knew Imperios was going to struggle a little bit early. It just kind of was the way that it was. Like, he is a project for them on the top side in the same way that Oscar was a project. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, Imperios is losing to Wunder, throw it all away. Like, that is expected, even if he was the worst player on the Rift. But Razork and Vladi cannot play like this. Like, they cannot be this bad as a duo. They cannot be getting gapped by Skeens and Leader in terms of the jungle mid on the other side. That's just not acceptable. Vladi, in particular, I think was really bad in this game on the Talia. Leader completely gapped him in terms of tempo and laning prowess, which is not good when you're playing Ryze into Talia. Like, this should not be a matchup that Vladi struggles in at all, especially with the, you know, level that we thought he was at. And Razork also just never really had a lot of impact on the map. I will say Razork's KDA is probably a bit worse than maybe he actually played. He was at the very least looking for plays. He's just not a player that plays well from behind, and that was the situation they were in. I still really like Upset and Lospa. I think they can be really interesting as a bot lane duo, but Fnatic does have some problems and some things they need to work through, I should say. But it's best of 1. You don't want to freak out too much. Hopefully Razork and Vladi can get back on the same page in day number 3. And for SK, this is the kind of win you needed to see after day number 1 where they looked so lost. Like, this is them getting back on the horse and looking a lot more comfortable, especially if the solo laners, the veterans here, are going to look good. That's what you need for SK to be productive. We talked about that on day 1 as well. Then moving on to game number 5 of day number 2, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't super excited to talk about this one. It was G2 Esports taking on GIANTX, and GIANTX pick up a massive victory here. And I just want to preface this before, you know, we do everything. There are people, you know, in the comment section, especially here in the LEC, that do not like when I talk about takes that I got right or say that I'm too braggadocious on this channel. I can kind of understand where people are coming from. You know, I definitely don't want to always come across as me saying, oh, I'm right and you're wrong. Like, that's never the intention. I always try to make that clear at the beginning of my opinion videos, where I essentially say things like, hey, if you have a different opinion than me, that's great. Let me know what it is. You know, let me know where you disagree. And, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, do that, and some do it more, you know, I would say progressively than others. Like, some definitely leave some comments that are not constructive, that really much, they do not like the video. But, you know, I always try to be like, well, there's room to move to different areas, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to, you know, change my opinion. And then there are times where I just kind of have to take some victory laps, and you know what? This is the week. This is the section. If you do not like hearing me be more braggadocious about some of my takes, then skip to the next game, because that's going to be most of this review. But boy are GX and G2 both making me look very smart right now in terms of the way they're playing at the beginning of the year, because there's no other way to simplify this game other than Noah is better than Hansama. And like, he just is. Like, he's a better player, and I get it. It's a best of 1. Like, all of the people in the comments who are going to tell me that I'm overreacting to this, or that Hans has clearly been better over the course of his career, I understand what you mean. Hans has been on better teams, he's been in better situations, and there were times, especially like when Hans first joined G2, or when he was on Rogue back in the day, where I really do think he was performing like an elite AD carry. But we cannot sit here and pretend like Hans is the same player in 2025 and 2026 as he was in 2022, like, or 2021. Like, it's not the same guy. It's just not. He doesn't have that same kind of X factor. Him and Lebrov both were massive problems in this game, and Noah and Jun are the better bot lane. Like, I stuck to that take. People in the comment section of my primer video hated that take. They really did not like it. Every year, I get comment after comment after comment that I'm rage baiting, or that, you know, I cannot be functionally serious as an analyst because I'm not ranking Hans where I'm ranking him. Noah gapped Hans. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Noah was better than Hans. Supa gapped Hans in today's video as well. Like, it just is what it is. People need to catch up to where Hans Sama is actually at. I feel like I'm like screaming at a wall. Like, I'm Chicken Little. The sky is falling, man. Like, Hans Sama is not the guy that you think he is right now. And I think Noah and Jun are the guys that I think they are. The only thing I got wrong about GX, and I'm happy to eat this L, is I didn't trust the top side enough. Isma is for real. This guy's playing really well right now. Jackie's, I think, had a really great game. Caps has not started out this split well at all, and I think Lot is really stable on the top side. We knew this bot lane was going to be good, but I was wrong about GIANTX in the fact that I did not trust that the bot lane was going to be elite and the rest of the team was going to be as good as they are. This team is awesome to watch. Noah's player of the game. He continues to have an amazing start to the year. This Varus was excellent. If he had better ultimates, it would have been even better, but this guy's positioning in teamfights is as good as you could possibly ask for. He is much more adept at being able to carry 5v5 than Hansama is. That's not Hans' strength as a player. I understand that it's maybe an unfair comparison, but it is to say that Noah is certainly better in that phase of the game. Jun, for all of his bad plays, has way more good plays. We saw both the good and the bad of that support here, but he was certainly better than Lebrov was on the other side of this, and if the bot lane is going to be genuinely top 2 or top 3 in the league, which I think is fair to say about GX, then yeah, they're going to shatter this number 9 ranking, and I'm going to feel silly for ever having doubted this team because I've always been so high on these two players in particular. But part of the reason that I was low on this team was because I didn't trust the jungle mid. I didn't think they were going to be as good as they've actually been. Isma has very much carried over his strong start so far through the first 2 games. Jackie's has looked good. He dapped Caps, quite frankly, in this one. Lot, like I said, has been stable. GX just looked great. Happy to see them play this well. And for G2, like, all of their problems are coming to the forefront. I'm not going to panic here because G2's still going to be fine moving forward. They're going to be top 3 basically no matter what. There's just no universe where G2 is not going to be competitive. But are they going to be that number 1 team right now? There are some major question marks there, and it continues to be led by the bot lane. This bot lane is not as good as people think they are. Like, I'm sorry, I'll die on this hill at this point. I really do think that last year they got bailed out a lot. Summer split obviously was a bit of an exception, but at the beginning of that year, like all throughout winter, all throughout spring, especially in spring, the reason that this team was not winning the LEC was this bot lane not being able to lock in, and they're still not good. Like, and I'll say this, they're good individual players. Like, Hans is fine. We've seen that in the right situation, he can look like a star, and Lebrov in the right situation can look like a star. But what I mean to say is that this duo and the way that they play off of each other, they're just not synergistic. They're not complementary. They make each other worse. And I think that that is just the stage that we are at. Both of them were bad in this one. Hans was completely gapped by Noah. His KDA is not nearly as good as the way, or I should say, like, Hans played worse than his KDA would indicate. He only died twice, but he tried to die a lot more. Lebrov also played really bad, though, and Lebrov for me was even worse. He's getting dud of the game. As much as I don't like Hansama, I'm not just going to give a dud of the game just purely off of narrative. I think Lebrov was worse here, but Hans was equally as bad at times, and I think that needs to be pointed out. Skewmon just playing really well to start this year, and there were times, you know, most of this game, him and Isma were completely even with Isma playing well, but Caps is not in form, Broken Blade is not in form, and the bot lane is not playing well. This is not a particularly cohesive G2 team right now. They do not play the map well. Their meta read right now is the worst in the entire league. There are problems, like real issues with G2 that they need to solve starting 0-2, but for GIANTX, what a massive victory. I'm all in on Noah and Jun. Like, I'm sorry, Hans is the 5th best AD carry in the league. I should have committed to that in the primer. Noah is better than him, and I think he proved that here today. But then moving on to our 6th game of day number 2, our final game of the middle day here, and it's probably the biggest on paper. It's Movistar KOI taking on Corp, and Movistar KOI are going to pick up yet another victory. They start the year 2-0, picking up wins against the 2 other best teams in the league. Yeah, man, I guess KOI are the team to beat right now. Like, is that crazy to say? Like, obviously, Corp is, you know, solid and they have some good things, but they didn't look phenomenal on day 1. I think there was already some hesitation from me, you know, that I needed to see them kind of prove their number 1 spot, and they have not proven it yet. KOI has proven right now that they should be considered the number 1 team in the league. Obviously, we'll talk about the rest of the week when we get there, but they look as good as they could possibly look, and I think retaining all 5 members has certainly helped them out quite a lot. Let's talk about it here. Player of the game is going to go to Supa in the bot lane. You know, I already did the rant in the last segment, so I'm not going to go on this again, but for all the people who told me it was crazy to put Supa as a top 3 AD carry in the LEC, here you go, man. He's starting off incredibly hot. He was better than Kalist here. He was better than Hansama day number 1. Supa looks great out of the gate. He is a phenomenal team fighter. He is a psychopath in the way that he positions. He's really built like an LPL AD carry that just kind of plays in the LEC, and I think that's what makes him so successful. And I think especially if Alvaro is going to start picking up more enchanters like he has been recently, that could be a really dangerous duo. I think Supa would honestly benefit a lot from enchanters down on the bottom side. Alvaro still needs to get a bit more consistent in that phase of the game, but Supa has looked as good as you could have hoped through the first 2 games against the 2 best teams in the league. So or at least the two other best teams in the league. Not quite the, KOI has certainly kind of pushed themselves to that number 1 spot. I do want to give a lot of credit to Elyoya, though. Just like on day number 1, Elyoya continues to look fantastic. There is a good take here in where I ranked Supa, and there is a bad take here in where I ranked Yike. We'll talk about that. I'm happy to eat the L on that if he's going to perform like this throughout the year, but Elyoya just completely gapped him. He's probably the best jungler in the LEC right now. He's obviously been number 1 in my rankings a lot in the past, but I don't know why I didn't trust him going into this year. I should have, because that was wrong of me. He looks fantastic right now in the jungle position. The Jarvan looked great. The Jace on day number 1, he was the only player that actually utilized that champion to its fullest effect. He looks fantastic. Like he looks like he's in a position where he's going to be able to dominate the league throughout this year. Mirwin was awesome on the top side, was better than Kana at being able to stabilize in teamfights. Again, Kana getting one of the strongest champions on the patch in the Rumble. Mirwin was more relevant in this game on the Scion. Alvaro has a great scoreline, still has some things he needs to work on these playmakers that aren't like Rel and, Nautilus. Obviously, he's an engage-oriented player. That's what he's most comfortable on, but I think he's a lot better at these champions than he gets credit for, and I think he played a better game here today than he did on the Nami in game number 1. Only negative is that Jojo Pune was doing his little North American thing and then just running it down for a little bit of time. But overall, they played front to back. They just played for team fights, and they were able to win the game. It's really, really simple League of Legends, and KOI is capitalizing on it well. And then for K-Corp on the other side, like Yike is just not playing well. I think that is their biggest problem. He is dud of the game. If he doesn't start to figure things out, I think this team could continue to struggle. Again, that is the take that I will happily eat the L on, is that Yike does not look nearly as good as I thought he would at the start of this year. Hopefully he can figure things out. Yike is a player I've really liked in the past, but he might be as low as like the number 4 jungler in the league right now. I mean, depends on what Razork ends up looking like. It's not like Razork looked better here today, but he's not been better than either Skewmond or Elyoya at the start of this year. So I think it's fair to kind of put him below them in terms of what your expectations are moving forward. Again, it's 2 games. You don't want to panic. You don't want to freak out, but certainly something to keep in mind, especially with such a small sample size in split number 1. Busio certainly wasn't as effective here as well. I was really intrigued to see the Jojo versus Busio matchup, just because obviously as a North American, I was curious to see how that would go, and Busio did not get the better end of that with the Karma here. Khalees did not have the pressure he wanted on the Caitlyn. Supa did a great job of being able to play out that laning phase, and by the time they got one fight in them in the mid game, like Supa was already ahead of the Caitlyn and already dealing more damage. Yehu wasn't really playing the map well. Kana was not as good as Mirwin. K-Corp didn't look good in this game, and I think there are, real problems with this team, real concerns that could keep them out of the upper echelon, but luckily for them, I think a lot of the other LEC teams right now are also showing some problems at the top. One of them is not KOI. They look like the best team in the league at the current moment, and if they're able to keep up this pace, especially Supa and Elyoya, who I think have started off the year incredibly hot, even Mirwin, who I think has looked really good so far, if they're able to keep that up, like who's to say they're not the best team in the entire region? But that's going to bring us to our third and final day of action here in LEC week number 1, and we kicked off day number 3 with the matchup between Na'Vi and Fnatic, where Fnatic is going to pick up the victory. It did look pretty up in the air for quite a bit of this game. Na'Vi continuing to look fantastic in the early game, but they did not have the firepower, or more importantly, the execution at the end of the game to be able to come through and close this one out with a 3-0 week. They take their first loss of the split, but Fnatic avoids disaster. They avoid going 1-2, which just would not have been a very good start for this team, and they get themselves above 500, which I think is where they are looking to be. Once again, player of the game for me is going to go to Upset. Didn't really have to think about this one all that much. He was the pivotal team fighter in the back half of the game that ended up winning them a lot of these fights. Upset still is fantastic. I continue to be an Upset defender. Is he a game breaker? No, he's just not going to be the kind of player that's ever really going to completely push the game forward in that kind of way. He is kind of beholden to his team and the situations that they can put him in, but Upset is one of the few players that if you put him into a good position, I can pretty much guarantee you that he's going to be able to pay that back out. He's not going to make back-breaking, game-losing errors, at least consistently. Everybody in the LEC makes some level of back-breaking, game-losing error, but he's going to do it less than basically any other AD carry, and he's going to be hyper important in the back end of the game if you give him the resources early on. So credit to Upset, he continues to look really good, but I think more importantly, it's his synergy with Lospud that I think genuinely does look very solid here. I've been really impressed with Lospud down in the support position. I think he's looked so good in week number 1. Not that that should surprise anybody. I think, again, support is just one of those positions right now that in the LEC, there are so many really talented, really quality players, and even the rookies coming in, I think, have ridiculously high floors. Lospud was one of those players, again, somebody who was spending time in the Challengers League, playing with high, tier 1 players at this point, like Quid and like Pays on Gen G's, Challengers League team before coming over to GIANTX Pride and, looking really good at Tier 2. This is somebody that we knew was going to look good for Fnatic, but him and Upset have been the core part of this team and the reason that they are succeeding early on in the season. We'll see if they can keep that up. As for the rest of the team, there are a lot of things that need to be worked on. Razork and Vladi still don't look like they have great chemistry together. Now, I don't really want to start putting this on him because, again, it's only been 3 games, but Razork, throughout my time covering him on this channel, but on Misfits, on Fnatic, now obviously with a different mid laner on Fnatic, I don't know if Razork has ever had good chemistry with a mid laner, like at any point throughout his entire career. It's just very strange to watch him play the game because he plays around mid so much, and yet he almost never like actively looks comfortable doing so, and him and his mid laner almost always look like they're on different pages no matter who the mid laner is. The best it came was Poby last year, unironically, on the other side of this matchup that we will talk about. Those were the only two that ever really felt like Razork felt comfortable playing off of his mid laner, but Vladi also kind of looking like he needs some time to adjust to being on Fnatic. It just doesn't feel like everything is clicking in the middle of the map right now, but you have to hope that it's going to get better. And then Imperios on the top side continues to be fine. Maintur is a better player right now, but he got Rumble, so it ended up working out. Not to say that, again, that Razork and Vladi were bad, just more so that I want to see them really start to play well together, and it doesn't always feel like they're on the same page with a lot of the decisions that they are making. But still, nice win for Fnatic. Certainly not a lot to criticize here. And then for Na'Vi, just happy that they're so competitive, right? Like, losing to Fnatic isn't the worst thing in the world, but they probably should have won this game. Sam D was in a spot where he should have been able to carry in the back end. Not his fault, by the way. I'm not blaming him for losing this one. He just didn't have the rest of the team on his side, but what I mean is Na'Vi was in a good spot to win through their AD carry and just couldn't quite do it. I think Mainter once again played a pretty solid game on the top side. He's looked pretty good, but this is really your first glimpse of the jungle mid duo not playing all that well, or at least not playing perfect in the back end. Rylek, I think, had a tough mid game and really was the one player that struggled to maintain consistency going into Fnatic throughout a lot of the mid-game skirmishes that were happening, and Poby, while he was in a really good spot in the early game, just could not keep that momentum going. His laning looks great. The team fighting was super shaky here. He's going to get out of the game because he made some back-breaking errors on the Akali that really ended up losing Na'Vi this one. I think Paris needed to be a bit better in the support position, but overall, like, this is still an okay game. We're talking about a team like Poby underperformed in the late game, but he was up a ton on Vladi in the laning phase. He was playing that early game incredibly well, and that 1v1 potential is really coming through. He is one of the best laners in the mid lane position in the entire region. If he can start to grow and be more consistent in the later part of the game, things are just going to fix themselves. This is Rylek's first bad game in the LEC, and even then, Razork wasn't like hyper punishing him. He just wasn't team fighting all that well, wasn't skirmishing all that well. Those are things that I think are going to get better for him. And the rest of the team was generally fine. Sam D was good. Mainter was solid on the top side. Like, I'm still high on Na'Vi. I don't think this is the kind of game that like decreases my excitement for this team all that much. I think they still showed a lot of the positives that they showed over the course of, their first 2 games. They just weren't able to take away the win. But this was a necessary win for Fnatic to pick up because they don't want to be below 500. If they had lost this, I mean, we're not just talking about a team that goes down in the power rankings. We're talking about a team that's like, okay, you're in the cluster now with GIANTX and Na'Vi and, Shifters and all these other teams that I had, below Fnatic. Like, you don't want to be in that cluster. You want to be above them in terms of the rankings, and I think this win helps them stay there. Then moving on to game number 2 of day number 3, and it's a predictable outcome here as we saw Team Vitality taking on Corp Blue, with Vitality picking up the victory. Not really a ton to talk about here that we haven't already touched upon in today's video, but I do want to give some credit to a couple players on Vitality, even some players on KCB that continue to perform incredibly well. The problems for Vitality are very much coming through, but the good is also coming through, and the good right now is Knock on the top side. I think he had a really, really good week number 1, which is really nice to see. I was decently hesitant on Knock going in to 2026, at least in comparison to other members of the community, not because I don't see the upside. It's clear that mechanically speaking, this guy has everything necessary to be one of the best top laners in Europe. If he can start to dominate at all of the game in the way that he dominates the early game, then yeah, things are going to be a lot more consistent for him. Right now, I still think he needs to get a little bit more experience, or at the very least showcase that he has evolved in terms of being able to play team fights, but this is a great example of a game that I think Knock maybe from the beginning of last year would not have won this, despite the fact that he already was so good coming into the LEC. He had a pretty big lead. He absolutely dominated the laning phase against Tao on the top side, as you probably should do in a matchup like this, and then got to move around the map. But what Knock did that was really different is he was a big impact in terms of mid-game skirmishes. He was actually a really big threat. The Crocodile was huge in terms of these team fights, and he basically solo carried this game. Fleshy continues to look very good. I think Fleshy actually had a very good week as well. Those are the two players that I think stood out in a hugely positive way for Vitality in week number 1, but their problems are very much still there. I mean, despite the fact that Linsauce and Fleshy and Knock and all of these ancillary pieces are playing well, if Humanoid is not consistent, it's going to be tough for this team to feel good moving into the back end of the year. Humanoid for me was actually so bad that he is getting dud of the game despite winning the game. I don't do this very often for those of you who are new to the channel, but I really do think he was the worst player on the Rift here. Camelou was the other player I considered. I don't think Camelou played well at all in this one. He has not looked good so far in the LEC. Not that he looked good last year either, but he might even be the worst player on KCB, and that's kind of funny to talk about because he's the only player with tier 1 experience, but Humanoid was also just really, really bad. He got bailed out so much by the fact that his Crocodile on the top side was just giant, like that this Renekton could not be killed, and that Fleshy was also very good on the Rakan. Like, if those two players were not like the two easy best players on the Rift, Humanoid was bad enough where he could have actually made this game a lot more interesting, which would have not been good for Vitality. He needs to lock in. We saw him play really well on day number 1. Days 2 and 3, not so much. Karzi's scorelines look fine. I think he's played fine. He just hasn't really shown a lot of elite traits yet throughout this split. Like, he's not like the active carry that's trying to win the game. He's relying a lot more on the rest of his team to carry, which I honestly think is fine. Linsauce, Knock, Fleshy, they look solid, especially Knock and Fleshy, who I do think look very good, but I need to see Humanoid get into form before I really believe in this team at a high-end level. And then for KCB, not really anything surprising to talk about here. Yukino continues to look excellent in the jungle. This guy is a tier 1 caliber player that's just kind of stuck in a tier 2 organization. Not stuck, he opted in to staying in Europe and to saying like, hey, if I'm not going to be getting any LEC offers, then I guess I'll just play in tier 2 because I don't want to go back to North America. I understand it in the climate right now, but generally speaking, Yukino obviously deserves a tier 1 spot somewhere, and I think he's continuing to prove that. Camelou, like I said, probably could be dud of the game if you really wanted to put it in that direction. His positioning in these team fights is astronomically bad. He's just not a good mid laner, and I think Corp fans are going to learn that relatively quickly. They're going to learn the lesson that all Team Heretics fans learned last year. And then Hazel and Prime just were not, all that good. I would say this was easily their weakest game as a duo in week number 1. Tao was fine on the top side, but overall KCB still decently competitive. They're at the very least putting up a fight in some of these games, which I think is a good look for a team that did not have a lot of expectations going into the year, but Vitality is just better. The best players on the Rift were on their side. Knock looks good. Fleshy looks good. Linsauce also kind of looks good. If the veterans can step up, Karzi didn't look bad this week. It was really just Humanoid that needed to lock in. If he can start to figure things out and be more consistent, spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. It's never happened for Humanoid in his entire career, but if you can start to get some better performances more consistently out of Humanoid, it's clear that the other pieces on this team are good enough to be like real contenders. Then moving on to our third game of day number 3, and a bit of an upset in terms of the standings up until this point. It was Team Heretics taking on GIANTX, and Team Heretics are going to pick up the 41-minute victory, almost 42 minutes to close this one out. This was 0-2 versus 2-0, and somehow, some way, both of these teams walk out with a 1 in their 0 column, so not exactly ideal for GX to kind of get their 3-0 week spoiled. They would have been another 3-0 team. I think they did something similar either in spring or summer of last year, where they started 3-0 and then, were good, but maybe not excellent throughout the rest of the split. I think GX would have been in a really good spot if they picked this up, but they just don't. They end up really underperforming in this game. A lot of stuff comes crashing down. Jungle mid was terrible for them in terms of the performances here, and the draft was bad, and Team Heretics just take advantage. I mean, it's Tank City here. It's Dr. Mundo jungle. It's Mbessa on the top side, and it's very low damage outside of the Azir coming in from GIANTX to be able to break through it. But player of the game for me is pretty obviously going to Tracin on the top side. He was absolutely the most relevant and important player on Heretics in this game, and let me tell you, that is such a good thing to see. That is such an encouraging thing to see, I should say, for Tracin overall as a player. We were just talking about it in the other games for Heretics throughout this week, where it's like, man, they brought this guy in over Carlson, who overperformed expectations last year because they really think he can be a difference maker. I compared him to Knock. We just spent a lot of time praising Knock, who could be on a pretty big sophomore breakout year kind of thing, and I think Tracin could be in a decently similar spot from a mechanics perspective. It just was not there in the first couple games. The laning wasn't consistent. It didn't really feel like he was comfortable, he settled in, and he was awesome here. He actively won them this game in terms of the way he was team fighting on the Ambessa. He generated a pretty big lead for himself in the early game, and everything just kind of came together. Trayson needs to be a big piece for Heretics if they want to perform better than whatever they have over the first couple of days. This was easily the best that not only he has looked, but the best the rest of the team has looked in terms of the way they played the macro after he got his lead. Do want to point out that Ice and Stend were much better, much more stable in this one. They certainly weren't the carries. They still, ironically enough, were probably the weak links on the team in terms of how things played out. They were the least relevant lane overall, but they were the biggest problems on the first 2 days. So it's at the very least notable that they were not terrible in the way that they played here. Sheo and Saren looked like they locked in a bit. Saren was absolutely better than Jackie's on the other side. Really important to see him start to step up and maybe take a bigger role than I was expecting. You know, we talked about this team in the offseason as a team that was going to need to play around Trayson and around Ice, with Sheo and Stend being great facilitators and Saren kind of being, you know, more of a tertiary carry for this team. But if, you know, players like Ice and Trayson are going to be more inconsistent, especially if someone like Sheo is not going to be all that great in the jungle, all of a sudden Saren now has to take a much bigger role on this team. So I'm actually kind of looking for him to step up, and he was definitely better than Jackie's on the other side. Sheo played his best game of the split. Like, everything just kind of clicked here for Heretics that was not clicking in the other games. And it's a good look, but it's a best of one. I'm not going to overreact to their win here in the same way that I'm not going to overreact to GIANTX's loss, although I do think there are some concerning traits with the way that they played here. It seems like the community is not very high on this team, which does surprise me because my comment section is very high on this team. When you go and look on Reddit and on Twitter, it seems like people are like, oh, overrated GX finally crashing back down to earth, whereas it really does feel like my comment section was kind of against the idea of me putting them at number 9. Curious to know if you guys like continue to agree with that, or if maybe there was like a silent majority of people who just agreed with my number 9 ranking of GX and just didn't really say anything in the other video. Very curious to know that. But the top side, that was my worry, and it kind of came to fruition. Lot was generally okay. I'm not going to blame him for this game. The Aatrox is kind of hard to play, but the jungle mid duo here for GIANTX was terrible. Isma was missing every Malphite ultimate, was positioning very poorly. He did not look comfortable at all on that champion. If Isma is not snowballing games, he becomes a weaker player. That is just kind of the way it is for Isma as a jungler. And then Jackie's is just not good. Like, I'm sorry, I hate saying that. He's dud of the game for me here, but like, I hated calling this when I was like, man, Jackie's kind of had one split where he was good. He was good in summer, and I continue to die on this hill. I think it is preposterous, like truly ridiculous that somehow, some way he won Rookie of the Year. I think that that is one of the most disrespectful awards I've ever seen given out, because it's just one of those things, and I get it. He was really good in summer, but he was only good in summer. Like, in winter and in spring, especially in spring, he was not a good mid laner, and then he broke out in summer of his rookie year. Last year, he takes a major step back, starts playing like he did in winter throughout a majority of the year, and unfortunately, right now, he's playing like he did in spring of 2024, and that's just, it's not a good look, man. Like, Jackie's is a player with a very limited skill set in the way that he's playing. My comparison, my player comp to him, unfortunately, is becoming more and more true by the day, and that was VTO. I really don't see a huge difference between Jackie's and VTO as players, and it does feel like Jackie's prime is going to be even shorter than what VTO's was in the LEC, because this is just not a good look. And again, if Isma is playing poor, it doesn't even really matter that Noah and Jun were fine. Noah was on Jhin. Like, what is this, man? He has, like, dominated the first 2 games that you have played this year, and you put him on Jhin for game number 3. I like Jhin a lot as a champion, but not for your hyper carry, not for the guy who's supposed to be dragging your team to wins. It just feels like a very, very confusing, like, overall strategy. So GX drops their first game of the year, and Team Heretics picks up their first game of the year. I'm not going to overreact or freak out too much. I still think Heretics need to work on a lot, and GIANTX, while they do need to work on a lot, are very much still in that cluster for being top 5 in the LEC. It's just nice to see that both of these teams, or I guess in particular Team Heretics, has that next gear they can get into. But then moving on to our 4th game of day number 3, and it's another very big upset, but an upset stomp, if you will. It's Shifters taking on Movistar KOI, and Shifters are going to pick up the victory here. What a weird week this has been. Nobody wants to go undefeated, it would seem. Movistar KOI takes down the 2 other best teams in the league in G2 and in Corp. But yet somehow Shifters is too much for them. And Shifters, to their credit, honestly, looked great this week. I was getting concerned after their day 1 loss to GIANTX, but they played competitive in that game. If Bukata was just a tad bit more clinical in terms of his late game execution, I think they probably win that game, like, genuinely. And, you know, now you're sitting here, they pick up a big win on day 2, they pick up an even bigger win on day number 3. This might be a top 4 or top 5 team in the LEC, and I might have gotten it spot on in terms of the power ranking, which is really nice to see, because I never get rewarded for having faith in this organization. I'm glad to see the name changes maybe gotten out some of the kinks in their system. Player of the game for me in this one is going to Trimby in the support position. I agree that the bot lane was obviously dominant. Like, Supa and Alvaro had no shot in this one. They just got completely rolled over. And obviously we'll talk about that because I've been hyping up Supa throughout this entire video. So we must talk about the circle of suck that is currently existing right now in the LEC. But Trimby was just the best player on the Rift. He was dominant in lane on the Nico. He was able to dominate the 2v2 in ways that we kind of know him for. Like, this is his signature thing, is being able to generate resources for himself and for his AD carry before moving around the map in the mid game. But on that Nico, he was finding engage after engage, and he was landing ults on priority targets, specifically on Jojo Pune in the back end of this game. The Azir never really got to play that front-to-back style, and was really just a menace, like was kind of taking over the map in the way that he was functioning. And then Paddock as well. What a great week number 1 from Paddock. Honestly, I was really surprised by what we saw out of him as a player. Not because I didn't think he would be good. In fact, I did think he would be decently good here in the LEC, but he's good in like the complete opposite way of what I expected, where he was a psychopath in the LCK. He was somebody who was constantly stepping up and trying to 1v9 games, trading 1 for 2 in team fights, and just kind of like, you know, trying to skill check everybody, just being one of the most aggressive AD carries you will ever lay your eyes on. He's come over here to the LEC, and at least in week number 1, he's been a super stable, very consistent, like solid laner, solid team fighter. He looks really good. He looks like Ice did when he came over originally for BDS, you know, a couple of years ago, and he might even be better. His hands are certainly better than Ice's are, and we see that now with his time on Team Heretics. But Paddock and Trimby look great as a duo. If Trimby can be that player that kind of directs the cannon, as I talked about with Paddock's great hands, and if Paddock is going to be reining in some of his bigger mental errors that he's been making over the course of his career, they could be a very dangerous duo. Rooster continues to look excellent on the top side, this time on the Aurora. Nuke didn't even have the best game of his entire week. In fact, this is probably the worst game he had all week, and yet he was still better than JoJo. And Bukata certainly played the best game he played all week. Shifters looked great in their dominant win here. And KOI, like, how do I want to take this? Like, how do I want to talk about them beating the other 2 best teams in the league and then losing to Shifters? I don't really know. Like, how much stock do I want to put into this best of 1? I'm probably leaning towards not believing in it all that much. More so, this has a lot to do with how good Shifters can be on their best day versus how bad Movistar KOI is or anything like that. But JoJo, Supa, and Alvaro were just awful in this game. All 3 of them. JoJo, for me, is dud of the game. I think he individually played the worst, mostly because Trimby and Paddock were playing excellent, but Nuke was playing fine, and JoJo still was super far down and was constantly positioning himself poorly on the Azir. So for me, he was the weakest player in the game. But if you wanted to give it to either member of the bot lane, I think that bot lane gap was pretty big in this game. Supa was very bad, was also constantly getting caught out by Trimby engages, but, you know, had more of the problems happen in the early game, I would say. And then Alvaro jumps off of a, you know, enchanter playmaker type when he played Nami and Bard in his first 2 games, goes back onto one of the champions he's known for in the Nautilus and plays his worst game of the week by far. I think it's just weird, right? It's just one of those games that you kind of have to throw out. I don't like the draft, as you guys know. I don't really like the combo of scaling carries right now. Like Azir and Sivir, I think together is just hard to execute on. I think you need a part of the map that can just be strong side for you, because this game is so snowball oriented at the current moment. You kind of have that with Shifters on the other side, where the Cassio is there for scaling, but the Varus Nico lane is going to be very strong in the 2v2. You have to have somewhere to play in the early game, and I don't think KOI necessarily had that, but they also misplayed in a lot of key areas. Again, Goya never really had map pressure. Mirwin was fine on the top side. I don't really have a lot to complain about with him on the Rumble. He didn't really get a chance to play the game. Top lane's not always the most important role in the entire universe, but JoJo, Supa, and Alvaro just were off their game here today, and hopefully they can rebound because they started off the year so hot. And for Shifters, obviously, this is a massive win. This gives me a lot of confidence that this team actually is very good and that they are one of the front runners to be, I'm not going to say like the best version of themselves that they possibly can be, but certainly a team that I think can compete for top 5 and maybe even top 4 in the best case scenario. Then moving on to our 5th game of day number 3, our penultimate game of the video here, and it's Los Ratones taking on K-Corp, and K-Corp is going to pick up the victory, although this looked very close for much longer than it needed to for K-Corp. This is not a game they should be struggling in really at all. It's not like their draft was atrocious, although again, you're opting into double scaling carries here, Azir, Aphelios. I just cannot stress enough how frustrated I am right now with the meta read of a lot of these top teams who just cannot seem to comprehend the fact that the game is not built around being able to scale super efficiently right now. It's why we're running into a lot of these game states where they're either losing games for no reason or games are going a lot longer and are a lot closer than they need to be. It's because these top teams are just not trying in the early game where it's just so easy to be able to generate resources and advantages right now. I'm going to continue to be mad about this if the LEC just continues to be so behind the 8 ball. You know, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but this was my biggest problem with the LEC last year. I said this about them at Worlds, and when I talked about them in the Worlds primer, I've not remembered a region in like recent memory that was so behind the meta as the LEC was, like throughout all of 2025. Like they just did not seem to understand what the meta was. They generated their own meta domestically, and then it just got destroyed when they would go internationally. Now, obviously, G2 finally adapted at Worlds, and that was really exciting to see. Even KOI, to an extent, I think figured things out at Worlds, but their MSI meta read was terrible, their first stand meta read was terrible, and their domestic meta read was terrible for last year. Corp has carried that tradition over. They were one of the teams that never adapted in terms of their meta read last year, and it feels like they still don't understand what they're supposed to be picking, but LR are just not good enough to be able to capitalize. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Kana, for me, is player of the game, although, like, I don't know, man. Was anybody really player of the game here for Corp? I don't feel like anybody actually played all that well in this game. Kana was definitely better than Baus in the 1v1, and I think that was the biggest difference. Baus obviously going for Vi on the top side. People are complaining because he built Bruiser Vi and not Damage Vi. Very anti-Baus there, but the big problem for Baus that we're going to talk about is he just can't get away with the same kind of things he was getting away with in Tier 2. If he doesn't have the hands to keep up with other top laners, then his entire game plan kind of falls apart in terms of the way he plays the game, and Kana is just a better player than Baus is in terms of his hands, and so, you know, he's at these big deficits right now in the LEC, and he can't really do a lot of the X-Factor things that he's good at. Although he did find one good pick towards the end of the game. We'll talk about that onto Kalist's Aphelios, but Kana was so much better than him in the 1v1 and generated so many resources for himself on the Gnar in the early game that to me was, you know, deserving of an MVP caliber performance, a player of the game caliber performance. I think this was Yike's best game of the week. Is that crazy to say? He was finally finding engage angles, even with Velia playing the Mundo and really kind of shutting down a lot of what the Wukong wanted to do. Yehu, Kalist, Busio, they were all fine. Kalist's positioning needs to get a little bit more consistent, and Yehu is just not a carry. Like, he's not the kind of player that you want on Azir, quite frankly, to be this, like, dynamic damage dealer. He's never going to be the guy you want all your resources on. It's not really his game plan. It's not the way he plays the game, but I think that could fit onto a team in Corp that has plenty of carries elsewhere, like Kalist and like Yike and like Kana on the top side. So, you know, it fit here. Busio was fine on the Lulu. Again, there were mistakes, and I don't think Corp played all that well, but they certainly played well enough to be able to walk out of here with a win. Just not a great week number 1 from a team that I really wanted to see come out with a hot start. And for Los Ratones, this was easily their best game of the week, even with it coming against probably their hardest opponent in Corp, at least in terms of like raw mechanical skill. But their problems bleed deep. Like, Baus was really bad in lane. He's gonna get dead of the game for me. He just was not very good in this one. He found one pick onto the Aphelios in the late game, and that's the one time that Nemesis, who has had a great game up until this point, refuses to press R on Orianna and catch the Aphelios out. It really did feel like they had a moment there where they could have made something happen, but the lack of synergy or coordination or something on this team is clearly coming through. They're just not an LEC caliber unit at the moment, and Baus unfortunately can't really do the things that make him good at the LEC level when he's not winning lane. Crownie also, like, Baus we kind of expected to struggle. Velia has obviously struggled a ton at the LEC level. We expected that. Crownie has been awful for this team. Like, honestly, I really have just not been impressed. Like, this is a guy who was going to Worlds and was playing really well when he was last in the LEC, and I was really frustrated that he wasn't getting more opportunities. Well, he's getting an opportunity here, and he's completely letting it down. He is just not a good AD carry at this level. He's been one of the weaker players that we've watched in the LEC through week number 1, and that's just unfortunate. You know, I think I was hoping to see a little bit more, and I just don't think it's there. Obviously, he's played some good AD carries, but his positioning has just been terrible, and he really refuses to capitalize on basically anything. Reckless has been fine, but pretty limited in terms of his skill set. Nemesis has probably been the best performing player of Los Ratones so far, but even then, like, he was the one who refused to make the game-winning play or the game-saving play against Kalist that could have potentially won them the entire game, and that was a pretty big mental error. So, like, it just is frustrating watching Los Ratones. This is not an LEC caliber team. They don't really seem to have the aggression. The hands are really, you know, fumbling themselves at certain points. Like, they're just struggling a lot right now, and Corp are going to feel pretty lucky to be able to walk out of this week 2-1 and, you know, not completely against the grain. Like, they have not looked good so far throughout this split. Very similar to what we talked about with G2. It doesn't feel like a lot of the top teams are really locking in just yet. You just have to hope that this team will eventually get there. But that's going to bring us to our final game of the video. 18 best of ones, man. What a format. But we're closing off the week with SK Gaming taking on G2 Esports, another historic rivalry here for SK, with how G2 ended up starting. And G2 are going to get the better of SK in this one, getting their first win of the split in the final game of the week. They needed this. They needed a matchup against a team that just looked like they were begging for G2 to win, and that's exactly what they got because SK looked lost in this game. Thank God for Skumond because this guy is like the only player right now on G2 who's performing consistently. The bot lane was solid here. We'll talk about why their game was much easier than it was for, a lot of other people here. Caps played really well despite his scoreline. G2 just looked much better in this one. In SK, man, like, I'm sorry if this is going to be their game plan. If this is the way that they are playing this game, I'm out. Like, I am like fully selling my stocks on SK Gaming because we can just get into it first because I think it really is kind of the game as a whole kind of revolved around the decisions that SK made. It is clear what SK strategy is, and it's like Mickey X wants a leader to look as good as possible. Like, I don't know why. Like, I don't know if he's just like best friends with this guy and wants to prove to everyone that he deserves to be an LEC caliber mid laner, but I have never seen a support jungle duo camp mid lane quite as much as Mickey and Skeens did for all 3 games this week, specifically in game 1 and game 3, the 2 games they lost. This guy did not exist in the bot lane. Yoppa, unfortunately for him, was playing Corki into Ezreal Nautilus the entire game. Of course, he was not able to generate any sort of advantages. Hansama and Labrov got a completely free laning phase that they had to do absolutely nothing about. Really nice for Labrov because he's playing Nautilus and he's a great mid-game and late-game engager. His biggest weakness as a player is, of course, his laning phase, which was completely thrown out by SK Gaming. And then they put all of this pressure, all of this tempo, all of these resources into mid lane, and Leader still is like 100 times worse than Caps. Like, I just don't understand. Like, if SK is going to do this, it's completely unwinnable. Like, this is how you lose a game as fast as humanly possible. And G2 were happy to capitalize on it. Skumond continues to look excellent. He's player of the game. Like I said, he has been the one player across these 3 games that has genuinely looked good for G2. Caps wasn't very good at the beginning of this. Already one of my Hansama Labrov rant in the other game, and Broken Blade has not been very good through the first couple games. Skumond right now is holding the team together, which is a crazy thing to say, but he gets Jace in this game and he completely dominates. He deserves player of the game, although Caps certainly gave him a good run for his money. His scoreline, his KDA might not look all that good here, but it's because I cannot stress this enough. SK's entire game plan was, I hope that Leader has a better KDA than Caps at some point in this game. Like, that is genuinely what you can boil down SK's ideology to, and Caps still ended up walking out being more effective. He hit incredible ultimates. He was dealing a ton of damage. He was super valuable playing in the late game. This was an awesome game from the jungle mid duo from G2, and they needed it, man. Labrov found some really nice engage angles because, again, he basically got a free pass through the one part of the game that he's not very good at. Hansama was deathless because he got to play Ezreal and was never really punished by a playmaking support, which we saw in this one. Didn't even have to lane into another AD carry because Yoppa was just under tower the entire game. Broken Blade didn't die on the top side, but he also didn't really affect the game all that much. Broken Blade has started incredibly slow so far in 2026. Like, it just was, G2 needed this. Like, they really, really needed this performance where Skumond and Caps really stepped up, where Hans and Labrov could at the very least have a good late game because that's what they did last year. Like, G2 need their confidence back, and I think this got it for them. And then for SK Gaming, like, come on, man. Like, what do you even want me to say? Their entire game plan was, I hope Leader at some point can play into Caps. Like, Mickey X threw away his entire game. Skeens threw away his entire game for them to just sit mid lane and give this Aurelion Soul as many resources as possible, and this guy still got completely outplayed. Like, it's just despicable. Leader is obviously dead of the game. When you get, like, your entire team to camp you mid lane to play 3v1 against an Orianna, and you still do absolutely nothing in the late game, you deserve dead of the game. I'm sorry. This was just terrible from him. I feel bad for Yoppa, who didn't really even get a chance to play this game. He wasn't very good in the latter half because his teamfight positioning, is tough when you're super far down on Corki, but dude had to be completely sacrificed for Leader to even be in this game in the first place. Wunder on the top side is probably screaming, like, what the hell is going on elsewhere on the map? We're, like, FFing the game at 10 minutes with our decisions. It just felt so strange to me. SK look like they are completely lost on the map. It feels like there is a personal vendetta from Mickey X to prove to people for some reason that Leader is a good mid laner. It's not working out right now. Mickey is suffering for it, Leader is suffering for it, and SK look bad for it. And for G2, again, they're just thankful that they ran into this because they needed a dopamine boost. They needed some confidence coming their way, and I think this is the kind of game that gives you the confidence that, hey, we can still execute when we need to. Hopefully they can carry this over into week 2. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC versus week number 1 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 1 week of action. A lot of ties right now, especially for first place. It's a 7-way tie for first place at 2-1 with how things worked out in week number 1. You could not ask for anything more competitive than this. Basically, every other team is also tied for 8th, I guess, at 1 and 2 as well. Only one team with a 0 in either column, and that is unfortunately Los Ratones at 0 and 3, but no undefeated teams coming out of week number 1, so still a lot to play for everyone involved. Let's go ahead and go over my power rankings. You can see that to the right of every single team under the power ranking column, and then change is going to be how they have changed from last week, or I guess from the primer to now. So we can go over risers and fallers. First and foremost, I still think it's a top 3 right now, despite the fact that, you know, quite frankly, 2 and 3 on this list didn't feel very good, but Movistar KOI are going to move up to number 1. They beat the other 2 best teams in the league in a best of 1. Right now, they have to be considered, you know, the team to beat. I don't know if they're going to go on to win the LEC this split and to go, you know, do really well at first stand or anything like that. Like, I'm not super confident in this team quite yet, especially with their loss on day number 3, but they certainly were the best performing team in week number 1 from my perspective, and they're going to get that number 1 spot because of it. Mostly because Corp and G2 just both look so bad. They're going to drop to 2 and 3. I'm not going to fully buy out on these 2 teams. At least Corp went 2 and 1 despite not looking all that good. But honestly, they don't feel good right now. Like, there are some real bad vibes, I think, surrounding both of these teams in terms of their meta read and just in terms of the form that they're in. Yike in particular looked bad for Corp, and G2 in general just did not feel like they had a lot under control. We'll just say it like that over week number 1. I need to see more out of both of them. Fnatic stays at number 4. I considered them putting them up at number 2. You know, like, honestly, it was on the mind, just didn't want to pull the trigger. I don't think Fnatic are quite there yet, but that's to say that, like, a lot of the teams at the top, there's still a lot of dissension. Now, everybody else, as you know, was all kind of in the same tier for me in the middle of the standings, and that very much stays the case. Shifters actually are going to stay at number 5. They had a couple of big wins towards the end of the week, and they almost took down GIANTX in day number 1. If they could hold on to their leads, that would be preferable, and they probably could have won that game, but it just didn't end up happening. They feel like the best of the rest right now. GIANTX, though, going to jump back up to number 6. I see a lot of people talking about this team as not being as good as maybe their record would have indicated. I disagree. I think their bot lane is incredibly good. As long as their top side can play average, they can win almost any game. Number 7 for me is also going to be a jump. It's going to be Navi, moving all the way up from number 10 to number 7. I considered putting them even higher, but again, their loss on day number 3 did worry me a bit to Fnatic. But they were in that game. They definitely had the chance to be able to win it. Very similar to what we talked about with Shifters. Right now, in terms of like the middle tier teams, it does feel like there is like a halfway grouping. To me, Shifters, GIANTX, and Navi are like the upper tier of the middle teams in the LEC right now. And then kind of the bottom tier of the middle team starts with Vitality moving down to number 8. If Humanoid was better this week, they would have been in that upper tier, but Knock and Fleshy are at least looking really good, so that is a good sign. Number 9 for me is SK Gaming. I just do not believe in the direction that they are headed in right now. I still think they have the talent to be better than this, and if you wanted them at 8 over Vitality, I would kind of understand that. I view these 2 teams very similarly right now, and then a team that's really fallen out, at least of my confidence rankings for the moment, is Team Heretics, who falls all the way to number 10. Just really did not like the way they played this week, and even with the win on day number 3, with Tracen in particular looking better, I still think there are some flaws in this team. The 2, I guess, provisional teams in Corp Blue and Los Ratones swap spots because of KCB's win. KCB moves up to 11. Los Ratones moves down to 12. I don't think a lot of people are going to be arguing that. KCB has probably even looked better than a team like Team Heretics across this week, but I didn't want to commit too much to the power rankings changes. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below. I'm always curious to know what you guys kind of feel about these power rankings. So who's high, who's too high, who's too low? Let me know down in the comments. But let's move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 1. Player of the week for me was really easy to choose. It's Noah, the AD carry for GIANTX. He was the best player in the LEC in week number 1. Even in their 1 loss, as you can see at the bottom of your screen, to Team Heretics, he was playing Jhin and didn't even really get a chance to play the game. He was fine in lane and just really couldn't play. Like, it wasn't his fault, but the 2 wins were basically on his back. He carried the late game against Shifters on the Kai'Sa. He was excellent in that game, and, you know, Shifters is a good team, as we've seen, and then the Varus game was like 1v9 with him versus G2. He completely gapped Hansama in lane and out of lane. He was dominating team fights. Just a great showcase for Noah this week. I think he was the best player in the league. He is my player of the week. Honorable mentions for me, 2 other AD carries. Upset, the AD carry for Fnatic, I think was underratedly very good this week. He's not getting nearly enough credit for, I think, how consistent he was across all 3 games, even their loss on day number 2. And then Supa, the AD carry for KOI. Somebody from KOI had to be here with how well they played. If you want this to be Elyoya, I understand that. I kind of debated back and forth whether this would be Supa or Elyoya. I think Supa was a tad bit more consistent in the late game. Elyoya was also excellent, though, and he was the early early game bridge to kind of help get them there. Consider this a combo spot for both Elyoya and Supa as honorable mentions alongside Upset. And then my dud of the week, this was unfortunately a pretty easy choice. It's going to go to Velia, the jungler, of course, for Los Ratones. Just not a good debut week for Velia. He really looked outclassed, and I hate to say it, but we kind of expected that here with the tape that we saw in Tier 2. Hopefully he can start to get his feet under him. He looked very nervous. He was very jittery on stage. Hopefully he can get a lot of those nerves kind of under control, because I think he can be a good player. It just didn't necessarily show itself, and unfortunately Los Ratones still looking for their first win. But Velia is going to be dud of the week, and Noah is going to get player of the week for me. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be covering every single week of LEC Versus, of the playoffs, once First Stand comes around, all of that stuff. We also cover the 3 other major regions, so LCS, once it starts up, the primer is actually going to be dropping for LCS tomorrow, so get excited for that. And then, of course, the LCK and the LPL, alongside me casting for LPL English. If you're interested in, comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all